Boundaries are hugely important in parenting, because boundaries basically give the child an edge to their world to know what is acceptable. Being a child growing up, it's all about finding a sense of agency and finding your own voice. If you sit down and negotiate the boundaries with the kids, say, right, here's the situation, what do you think is an appropriate boundary? They might come up with something way too harsh, they might come up with something way too soft, but when you negotiate it out like that, the child has forethought and knowledge. If we've said, when you do this, you lose your cell phone for 24 hours, we've agreed to that, we've agreed that that's a fair consequence. When he violates that boundary, and I take his phone for 24 hours, that's a consequence. The difference between a consequence and a punishment is really that foresight and knowledge and being included in setting the boundary. Boundaries and consequences are what makes a child's behaviour better. Boundaries and consequences rather than punishment. The backbone style of parenting is what basically all the literature and research supports. A backbone gives you support and structure, but it's not rigid, it's responsive and flexible moment by moment. So that reflects our parenting style. It basically means we don't just tell them what to do, we do have boundaries, but we negotiate those boundaries out with the children. When we look at how we're going to teach our children to respect the boundaries of others, so much of it's in role modelling. So how we treat our partner or how we treat other people in our whānau and our family. The children pick up on that, and that's where they basically get the template for how they treat others, so model good behaviour of others. To communicate and establish clear boundaries with your teenagers, it's a wee bit more nuanced than when they were primary school kids. As a primary school kid, you can just say, right, here's the boundary. You make sure they have a voice and they're included, but you're basically doing 80% of it. By the time you get to adolescence, it becomes much more a partnership. They're no longer blindly going to do as they're told, and if you want them to be compliant and follow your boundaries, then you're going to have to negotiate with them and go into partnership to work out what those boundaries are. I think some practical tips for enforcing boundaries and following through on consequences is have realistic consequences. Don't put in place something that's going to require you to police it 5 hours a day because you're setting yourself up for failure. Just making that consequence easy for you to enforce so you're not spending your whole time playing policeman. You can go back to having that positive relationship with your child. In a situation where the teen is consistently violating or testing a boundary, I think number one, go back to how we set that boundary. They should have been negotiated with and consulted to come up with a boundary that we both thought was fair. So do they not think it's fair? Find out from them why they're not following that boundary. If that's not working, it might just be actually a case of you having to follow through on the boundary. That's how they're testing the boundary. You've negotiated it out, now it's your job, not with anger, but just calmly, consistently following through and making sure that consequence does happen.